So, hi, this is Charlotte Stevens and the Ancestors, and I just wanted to say thank you to Dink for giving me this platform to speak on and being an inclusive network. We very much appreciate you. And I am the CEO of Healing Racism in Schools, and I am here in the States. I work, I'm located in California, but I work all over the place. And as I was preparing for this talk, I was noticing the similarities between the work that I do in the US and the work that is needed over there in the UK. So, again, I am the CEO of Healing Racism in Schools, and I started my company from my own experience of being a Black girl in schools, right? So, even though this platform is in the UK, my story is definitely translatable, especially when I saw the statistics of what is happening in the UK is very similar. So same story, different country. So my story is that, I was somebody who really liked school initially, as a child. I was interested in learning, and I believe that most kids are interested in learning, and that when we see a lack of learning happening in our schools, that we need to think about that. So I enjoyed school initially, but I started to not enjoy school. And I started to, as I was able to get older and reflect, to see some of the racism that was apparent in my school. So to give a couple of brief examples, I remember here in the States, the standards are different, obviously, but we had, in the fourth grade, there was a mission project where you're supposed to build a mission, one of the California missions, out of sugar cubes. And a lot of times people just treated it kind of like as a dollhouse, project where you just kind of recreate what it looked like. But what I found out later is that the missions were used to torture and mistreat the indigenous people that inhabited these lands before white folks did. I know a lot of indigenous people are still here, but it was significantly more. And what really happened in the missions, what we're told is that, the white colonists were educating the natives and teaching them their religion and civilizing them and all of this. But what was really happening is they were being forced to look for gold. And if you didn't find gold, your hands were cut off, your tongue was removed, and other horrible things were happening. So it's a very sanitized history, right? From what I was learning, building these little sugar cube dioramas. And I know that in the UK, there's also a very sanitized history where when it comes to talking about colonization, or it comes to talking about, the enslavement of my ancestors and their contributions, that is also absent from the curriculum. So that's consistent here in the States as well. So that was fourth grade. I remember how little we ever talked about the enslavement of my ancestors, or how they built the economy globally and within the United States, how we built the infrastructure, all of the inventions, just all the contributions, how basically this country wouldn't be anything without the African-American labor, and neither would the UK, neither would the world, essentially, because y'all had us working for you and inventing things and doing all the stuff you didn't want to do all over the world, and we don't get any credit for it. So that's consistent as well over there in the UK. So that was difficult, right? So there's not learning much about the contributions of enslavement, but also people acting or the schools acting like my history starts at enslavement, when my history starts as the original woman. My history starts as, being, like I said, the original woman, descendants of Africa, descendants of the motherland, the birthplace of all humanity. It's so sad to me that in my career, teaching 12th graders and teaching seniors, they did not know that Africa was the birthplace of humanity. And I don't think that's by accident, right? Everybody will know that Black people are descendants of slaves, but very few people know that we are descendants of, humanity, that our birthplace is where humanity started. And I think that's by design. So I remember that. I remember being in 11th grade, and then we read Huckleberry. No, it wasn't Huckleberry. It was How to Kill a Mockingbird. And that book was riddled with the N-word. And I'm on a campus where my classmates are already saying the N-word. I'm on a campus where my teachers don't take it seriously when we're being called the N-word. So to have to go to class where I'm being, humiliated and being disrespected, and it's like psychologically not safe for me, definitely had an impact on me. And I didn't want to go to class. And I know that looking at the statistics that I saw for, again, the UK, very similar. So I saw a statistic that said that 93% of the headmasters of the schools are white, that 34% of your students are of color, though only 14.3% of your staff is of color. So consistent with what's happening in the States, and very consistent with the plantation model too. You have a white authority over, this population of color. And that 95%, and that's insane, 95%, that's near 100% of your Black students, Black British students said that the number one deterrent to their success is racism, right? So their number one deterrent of their success is racism. So what happens too often here in the States and the UK is we then turn around and blame the kids for their failures, right? These kids are clearly communicating that what is keeping them from being successful is the racist attitudes and the racist curriculum that they are saturated in. And yet if these kids go on to not complete school, we're going to turn around and blame them. We're going to turn around and say, why can't Black kids, get it together? Why can't they just finish their education? As an educator, I have a real hard time telling students to complete their education. And let me add a caveat. Absolutely, I want students to complete their education, but I also want them to actually receive an education. And too many of our Black kids are never going to see themselves in the curriculum, or when they do, it's in a negative connotation. And so I am concerned that students finishing school, especially students of color, are going to finish it with a sense of inferiority and a sense of, I'm not good enough. I never saw myself in the curriculum. My classmates didn't believe in me. My teachers didn't believe in me. So it's like, what is the cost of them having to come to your class and to complete, school? We know that Maslow's hierarchy of needs says that survival is number one. And after survival is safety. Right? After survival is safety. And too many of our Black students, whether in the US or UK or all over the world, do not feel safe. Whether psychologically they don't feel safe, whether physically they don't feel safe. And so if I don't feel safe, then I can't trust you, right? And as a teacher, you're going to want me to trust you. You're going to want me to be vulnerable. You're going to want me to be open to new experiences and to learning new things and to be receptive. But why would I do that when clearly this is not an environment that honors me, that respects me, that loves me, that cherishes me, that cares about me? And I remember as a student, I just didn't want to go to school. I didn't have the words for it because schools don't teach us the words. They don't teach us stereotype threat and white supremacy and microaggression and white privilege. We don't learn those terms. So all I knew is that I didn't feel valued, I didn't feel appreciated, I didn't feel respected, and I didn't feel good at school. So I didn't want to be there. And that's the reality of so many of our students. What I get really frustrated about is blaming the students when they're absent, when we see chronic absenteeism, or when we see students who just don't go to school, who are late, who are truant. We as educators, as the professionals, as the adults, as the ones with all the degrees, as the ones with all the experience, we are the ones that need to question, what are we doing? What type of environment are we creating where our students and our families don't feel a part of this? They don't want to be here. We have to question that. It's on us. It's not for us to then demonize these kids when they are not comfortable in our classroom. We need to question why they're not comfortable in our classroom. So I grew to hate school. I really could not stand high school. My teachers never wanted to talk about, I'm not sure they ever even mentioned white supremacy or really acknowledging racism or acknowledging that, whites have it easier everywhere, school included. So that would have made a world of difference for me. Because what happened was this: I went on to college, and college was great. That was the first time I had multicultural professors. That was the first time there was a true multicultural curriculum. I took every multicultural class I could take, not just studying myself, which was awesome because finally I was in the curriculum, but also studying other cultures that I was deprived of, and really, getting that global education that we all say that we want, right? We understand it's a global economy and it's a global world, but we're still saturated in white supremacy, which does not support us thriving in a global community. When the average human being is I think Han Chinese male, about 30 something years old, that's the average. An alien were to pluck a person off the planet, they would be a person of color. So it does not serve us. And as we continue to progress, and evolve as a humanity, there'll be less white people. So again, it does not serve us to keep perpetuating these attitudes of white supremacy. It does not aid us in becoming a true global society. So if you need an economic reason, you need to stop embracing this stuff. That's one, other than, it's just the right thing to do. So I went on to college. I took all these courses. It was a total game changer for me. And I didn't need everything to change. Like I would love education to be completely reformed top to bottom, and, you know, to really get rid of the white supremacist roots that are embedded in the UK curriculum and the US curriculum. But what I would love for that to happen. But in the meantime, you know, just being explicit about what is happening. Explaining to these kids, you know, you're not inferior. You're not, there's nothing wrong with you. This is a system of white supremacy that has been put in place to keep you down, that has been here for centuries. You know, just having that context of, oh, that's what's happening, right? Like, you know, because as a kid, and especially, you know, teenagers and middle schoolers, are just kids who are looking for acceptance, right? Like when you're just being rejected left and right, and you don't know why, you don't know why people don't like you, you know, and then you find out, or you don't even know that it's based on something that you can't control, or maybe you do, but like you can't put that in context. When you see your people failing or not doing well, and there's like just, or people just in poverty and systems of poverty, but you can't put that in context. You can't explain, well, you know, for 400 years, we exploited you, and we took your, all of the resources that were generated from your labor, you know, went into the white pockets, right? So, all of these things need to be put into context, and our students need to understand what is happening. And that's like step one, right? Like, absolutely. Again, I would love for schools to just be reformed. But in the meantime, the reality is we have white folks in charge of Black and brown classrooms, and the white folks that are in charge are not equipped or ready to foster the genius or understand the trauma of these communities. That's what it is. So what can be done, right? So let me just point out a couple more blind spots. An area that we tend to neglect when it comes to this conversation, and forgive me, I just want to be mindful of time, is STEM. So when it comes to the conversation of creating an anti-racist curriculum, we often put it on literacy, we often put it on social science, but we do not put it on STEM. And I'm in the heart of Silicon Valley. So I'm right here, you know, with LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook and all of these big tech companies. And what we know about these big tech companies, it is primarily white and Asian males who have those jobs. And even though I've looked at the stats, I've been doing my research on all of this. So they've had plenty of opportunities to hire Black and brown people who had all of the qualifications and all of the degrees and all of the engineering degrees and education necessary, but they just were not hiring them. And that's just employment discrimination. So, and then we know across the board too, the same thing happens with women of color and women in these tech companies. So all that to say is that all the STEM professors out there and everybody within math and science who thinks that this conversation does not apply to you, it absolutely 100% applies to you. So you can't just dismiss yourself. It's across disciplines. It's the whole thing. It's not just on math and English to sort this out. And let me demonstrate that for you. So what I do and what I've done in my classes in the past is I've had my students close their eyes, and I said, I want you to imagine an American. So in this case, you know, close your eyes and imagine, you know, somebody who's British. And I give them like a moment to like really think about, you know, what this person looks like and what, you know, who they are and all of that. And then when they open their eyes, I'm like, you know, did you imagine me? Was it me? Was I the person that you decided, you know, was the American, or did you imagine, you know, somebody of color? When you imagine somebody British, you probably didn't, because what we've done in our society is we've made person and white synonyms, American and white synonyms, woman and white synonyms. We love to say in my country that the 19th Amendment gave all women the right to vote, but it didn't. It gave white women the right to vote, right? We cannot make women and white synonyms. It's not the whole story. And I really resent that as a Black woman, hearing that, when it's like my ancestors didn't get the right to vote, and I'm tired of not being included. So when we say in math and science class that somebody invented this, but we don't talk about when we just say somebody invented this, the default is a white person invented this, right? We can't just be like, well, you know, we never even mentioned race in my class, therefore it's not racist. You don't have to mention race in your class for it to not, be racist. It's already there. The thing is that it's the opposite is true. Like, you have to be making a statement against racism in order for me to know that you are anti-racist. But if you're just not even mentioning it, then as a person of color, I don't trust you. Like, I don't feel safe around you because you are not really speaking to the unique experiences that I have. So within math and science, we can't just keep saying like, oh, somebody invented this, or just, you know, come up with all these, talk about all these inventions that have come from those disciplines, but not speak to who invented things. So for example, there's a lot going on with environmental science or sustainable, environmentally sustainable things, right? And so that's a popular conversation, climate change, across the board, and students are very passionate about climate change because they want their world to exist. And so while you're having that conversation of climate change, you could be mentioning this Mexican woman scientist who invented sustainable plastic from cactus, right? There's all kind of ways that you can be incorporating these marginalized communities into your curriculum. Whatever subject you're talking about in science, find a person of color, preferably like a woman of color or super marginalized community, to demonstrate to your classroom that these people exist within STEM, because if you can't see it, you can't be it. I'm so glad that, we have a Black woman as our vice president, because my daughter can see that and I can see that. And that makes me feel like that's a real possibility. Whereas it didn't feel that way before, right? Before Barack Obama was president, I didn't believe that Black people could actually be the president of the United States. We love to say that, just like we like to say all men are created equal, but that's not our lived experience. So STEM cannot be absent from this conversation. Science has been used historically to justify the mistreatment of Black people. They tried to say that we had smaller brains, or just all kinds of myths that has been used. And then throughout the medical industry, we are disenfranchised. We've been medically experimented on. A lot of the advances in medicine have come from the torment and the medical experimentation that happened from people of color. The Tuskegee experiment happened over here where they were giving us, syphilis. STEM is not exempt. Science has definitely been used to justify and to further the goals of white supremacy, and we need to talk about that. We need to talk about medical experimentation. We need to talk about all the millions I'm gonna go ahead and say millions of inventions that people of color have invented. The first open heart surgery was a Black person. The GPS came from a Black woman. What was it? The Exceller glove, which is a glove that if you're doing sign language, and if I was doing sign language right now and you don't speak sign language, I could put on this glove that was invented by this Mexican man that will translate what I'm saying into words. One of the first color TVs was invented by a Mexican man. One of the first PCs was invented by a Black man. This should be basic knowledge, but it's not. And when it comes to what people know about the contributions of African Americans and other people of color, it's few and far between. And I know that our ethnic groups are different from in the UK, but the story is the same, whereas we're still not teaching the true contributions of people of color. The curriculum sanitized and whitewashed. You have teachers who are demonizing hairstyles. That's another thing I want to talk about. So our Black girls are often neglected when it comes to the conversation of what's happening to our Black kids. We don't talk about anybody, but when we do look at Black Lives Matter or things of that sort, we're typically focusing on Black boys, and our Black girls have a unique experience as well. And one of the things that they face more so than our Black boys is hairstyle discrimination. And I read about this within the UK. That was, I think, 70% of Black Brits say that they feel pressure to change their natural hair. And what I want white America to understand is can you imagine if the way that your hair naturally grew out of your head was seen as offensive, or you could be told that you can't walk the stage or you can't participate, in school, because unless you were to then go on and put these toxic chemicals on your hair that are expensive, that are damaging to your system, that are time consuming, unless you do that, then you can't be a part of our school. Or for a lot of Black people, you get fired. It happens here in the States as well. New York had to pass a law against hair discrimination, but that's ridiculous. Like I have natural hair, right? And there's jobs that would discriminate against my natural hair. And it's insane. And there's statistics that say that Black women spend more money on their hair than they do their education. And it's like, you need to ask why. Well, because in our experience, our education is not as valued as much as our hair. And it's all about culture fit. It's all about making white people feel comfortable. It's all about, at least in the United States, during the Black Power movement, there was an increase of natural hair. And so I know that when I used to have my big afro, I used to watch my white bosses be intimidated. I used to watch them and their reactions towards me when I'm just embracing, parts of me that I've been told not to embrace. So that primarily happens a lot to our Black girls. It does happen to our Black boys as well. But it's something that we need to take into accountability about the differences between their lived experience. And then sexual assault, sex trafficking. When it comes to sex trafficking, that is primarily our girls of color that are being sex trafficked, and they're being bought by wealthy white men. And it's the same thing that was happening in the plantations, same thing that was happening on the reservations, same thing that happens with colonization and imperialization all over the world. And so everything that women face, all the sexism, all the degradation, all the misogyny that the average white woman faces is exasperated and increases exponentially for Black women and for Black girls, and we're not protected. When Black girls are assaulted, I read a statistic in the States that for every one Black girl that reports a rape, 15 don't. And if you think about, how demonized women are or girls or people are when they speak up about their rapes, it makes perfect sense. But even more so for Black girls, because the myth is that, we ask for it. Where the myth is that we're oversexed, that we are just promiscuous. And that myth comes from our sexual exploitation during enslavement, when white men were raping us left and right. And that's the reality. The justification was that we wanted it. And it's the same justification that we use for rape victims now. We justify it by asking, what was she wearing? As though that is some type of, reason to sexually assault somebody. So our Black girls are often not believed, especially if like a white man is the assailant. And that is very common. We have a myth that, all these people of color are raping all these white folks, but historically it is white folks raping people of color. And that's still the case. Like I said, the statistics say that the people who are buying children are white men, married, wealthy white men. So that's left over from the plantation. So our Black girls are not protected. They're not safe. Most of our teachers are white females, and then they're having real issues with Black females. And it's because a lot of times the culture of the school is not conducive to Black culture. It's a white middle class culture, and it's a white middle class norms. And we never talk about it. We never explain these invisible rules. We never make them plain. But the inherent nature of school is in direct opposition to the culture of a lot of these ethnic minority groups, or what y'all call ethnic minorities. I call them people of color. So that's not surprising, because our schools were never created to support multiculturalism, or were never created to support the education of all students. I know that within the United States, Jefferson was all about educating the creme de creme of the white men. So it was like, whoever is the best of the white men will educate them, and everybody else can just be their workers and be their employers, including poor whites. And I know that when it comes to, colonized nations, that's pretty consistent. So our schools were never meant to educate students of color, and so they're doing a great job at fulfilling that goal. And unfortunately, we know that for students of color, it's life or death for us. We don't have the option of not being educated. It's very important that we get our education, but also it's important that education actually educates us and doesn't brainwash us into believing that we're less than. One thing that I would really love for schools to do, actually, I know I'm running out of time, so let me just get to how you can work with me. So what I do is I provide professional development for schools and school leaders to better serve Black and brown students, and to really face the inherent white supremacy that is embedded in the curriculum. So I have a 3-part series, and the first part is called Check Yourself, and that's all about identity. So even for me as a Black, middle class queer woman, like, I need to be aware of my lived experience. I need to be aware of my biases. I need to be aware of my blind spots and who I am and how I perceive the world and move through the world, so that I can better serve my classroom of diverse learners. And the more I know myself, the more I understand who I am and how I move through the world, and the better I can reach them. But for most of our white instructors, that question of identity is never really questioned. It's never really even thought about. And most white people want to think of themselves as an individual, right? I'm just Miss Smith or Miss Green or Miss Berkshire or whatever the names are over there in the UK, right? But you need to understand that you represent your group, your community, and that when a white teacher stands in front of me, before I see anything, I see your whiteness. And real talk, that's the first thing you saw about me. The first thing you're going to notice about me is that I'm Black. Not that I'm brilliant, not that I'm beautiful, not that I'm this, that, or the other. You're going to notice that's a Black person. So white people need to understand that you don't get to just be exempt from this conversation of race. We're all, we all have identity, and that matters. So the first part is about identity and how you move through the world, and understanding that the way that you see the world is your specific, perception. It's not the perception. And for too many of our white teachers, they think that the way they see the world is the way to see the world. So that's the first piece. And that's generally about, a 6 to 8 hour training. And then the next one is about check your curriculum, because just like I said, in the US, the UK, the curriculum is sanitized. Nobody really wants to talk about, the horrors that and the inhumane treatment that whites inflicted on people of color and other people, and Black people in particular. No one wants to talk about, how enslavement fueled the economy, the world economy, that lined a lot of pockets in white families and white communities. That money is reparation. That money belongs to my ancestors. We don't want to talk about how meritocracy doesn't exist, because if meritocracy existed, nobody worked harder than my ancestors, right? My ancestors built everything, and they worked, sun up to sundown, and yet they have nothing to show for it. So we need to talk about our curriculum. In my country, we're still worshiping Christopher Columbus, and that's disgusting. I talked about, STEM, math, you're not exempt. We need to really sanitize, not sanitize, it's already sanitized. We need to tell the truth about what's going on with our curriculum and teach the truth. And then finally, the last piece is check your staff and students. And that's about the psychological safety and physical safety of our Black staff and our Black students. Too often we talk about we want more Black staff on campus, but I was Black staff on campus, and I walked away with a number of health problems, because it's not just about diversity. It's not just about increasing the number of people of color, in any given setting. If you have not done the work to become anti-racist and to really be inclusive, then you are just asking me to be in an environment that is not safe and that is traumatic. Like, I don't want to just be a brown face in your racist institution that's going to cause me health problems and mental health problems, and that's not worth it to me. So as a Black educator, when I was in these schools, that I had to constantly think about, I want to be here for these kids, but I also need to be here for my own children, my own kids, right? Like, I need to sustain myself. I can't just sacrifice myself. So we need to think about how we treat our staff, and definitely think about how we treat our students, because too often our students are saying, again, 95% of the kids in the UK are saying that racism is the number one thing that is a deterrent to their success. And yet we have teachers who are not prepared to take that seriously, not prepared to have that conversation, not prepared to really provide a safe environment for our students. And as we know, again, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if they're not safe, they're not going to function. That means that our kids are just surviving. And personally, I'm tired of surviving. I don't want to survive anymore. I want to thrive. I don't want to just get by and just be alive. I intend to have everything that my ancestors were promised. So if you want to get in touch with me, I am at healingracisminschools@gmail.com. Healing, HEALING, racism, RACISMIN, schools, SCHOOLS, pretty sure I spelled that right, @gmail.com. And I would love to see what possibilities we can create for your school. And I want to thank Dink and everybody who was willing to listen to what I had to say. This work is extremely important. And I think about, I'm here and I'm present during a time when this is happening. Therefore, it's on my watch, and it's on your watch too. And we can pretend like, we're ignorant and we don't know what's happening. But once you know, you can't unknow, right? Once you take that blue pill, you can't go back and untake it. And so those of you who know and are aware of what's happening in our schools and how our children are not protected, just as much as it's my responsibility to be addressing this, it is yours as well, because you're aware. And when you're aware, you're expected to do better. So again, healing racism in schools @gmail.com. I'm Charlotte Stevens and the Ancestors. You can follow me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Facebook. I have a Facebook group for educators. It's called The Anti-Racist Educator, Fighting White Supremacy in Schools. The Anti-Racist Educator, Fighting White Supremacy in Schools. I also have a podcast, Healing Racism in Schools. You can check that out as well. So thank you so much. I appreciate you, Dink. Thank you for being inclusive. Thank you for everybody who took the time to listen to me. Have a wonderful day.